What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jarrell, and I'm with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well out there.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, let me know what you've been playing.
Yeah, so I haven't been home. That's why we missed an episode. And I just obviously didn't have many of my systems with me, but a few things I did test out. I really tested out Xbox xCloud, the cloud service, streaming service, and was surprised how well it worked compared, to the only other thing I can compare it to is Stadia. It's the only other thing that I've used. So I was pretty far from home. I was able to, my system wasn't on or anything like that, and I was playing Gears of War. Pretty interesting. I did test it out with touch controls, and that's obviously impossible. But luckily I did have a spare, or they had a spare control I could use, and I synced it up, so it was surprisingly smooth. I wasn't playing multiplayer or anything like that, playing campaign and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I can kind of see this going. And then I thought, why not take the chance? And I finally tested out Amazon Luna, which is their streaming service. I registered a long time ago, and I guess the email was sitting there because they gave me like a final warning for me to test it out. And I did. It was kind of hard to even find a game I wanted to play on there. So I jumped into Sonic Mania, and it felt like a slightly more stable Google Stadia.
Okay.
But it was just kind of weird. I don't know. It just didn't feel as good to the xCloud. The games were kind of wonky. You'd have to create new saves for every game. My Gears of War saves picked up exactly where I was, from my home console to my save data to the costume and gear that I had on. So Amazon Luna seems like a better profit because there's like a small subscription fee, and you kind of have like this library of games, and there's certain things on there. I just didn't, it's still in this super like sort of beta phase, so I didn't want to like too harp on it, but I was like, let me try it since I am doing some of this streaming, and I thought, why not give it a shot? And again, it was definitely playable. It was slightly confusing. I don't know, it wanted to kick back every time I wanted to use I was using a DualShock down there, and it would kick back and not register, and then unhook it, and then I would switch it back to xCloud, and I'd be completely fine. So it was really weird, but it was interesting to see these two other platforms just really, really eat the cereal out of Stadia's bowl, because it's ridiculous. Because xCloud is not perfect, but pretty good. Like I would continue to use this, and I did throughout my time when I was not home. Amazon Luna I tried twice or two or three times, and I was like, it just doesn't feel as good, and there's nothing I want to play on there specifically, which is obviously the big thing. Video games. There's just wasn't much that I wanted to play at the moment to at least show off the hardware. Sonic Mania is obviously not that taxing.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I played, again, that's I didn't have my systems with me. Don't know why. I kind of just got the itch to do it. I've been playing the original Plants vs. Zombies again, which is, obviously we all know the original Plants vs. Zombie, great tower sort of defense strategy game. And I forgot how charming and addicting that game was. I fell off, obviously, when Plants vs. Zombie 2 came out, and it was just a microtransaction party, where every 2 levels, they'd hit you with a microtransaction, buy this plant for 99 cents, and all the stuff I hate about mobile games was present in PvZ2. So playing the original one, I forgot just how charming and quick you need to be, and choosing your resources and stuff like that. And it's funny because I'm not too into those kind of tower defense games or anything like that, but it was just exciting to see just kind of how I've beaten the game before, but to be recaptured in it so many years later. And it's just like, I was like, I remember I do enjoy this quirky world. A world that you're playing plants fighting zombies just makes no sense. There's that crazy guy with a bucket on his head that comes out, but just the different tactical and how like deep some of the mechanics can get when certain plants do more damage, some do more helpful to you, and it's just like, wow, I like this. I do like this, and it reminded me that I do want to try those other third-person shooter versions, the 2 Modern Warfare, the Garden Warfare games, and then there's a third one that they rechanged the name. So I'm sort of in that Plants vs. Zombie vibe, where I'm just kind of cracking through the first game. I will probably skip the second game. I don't think the third game exists yet in America, but I'm dabbling maybe to play the other ones. I'm sure they're on EA Play or the Game Pass somewhere.
Yeah, they're on Game Pass, all of them.
Yes, to play those Garden Warfare. I almost bought them when I was gone. I was like, nah, I'm pretty sure I knew they were somewhere with the EA Play. So that's all I've been. I was just glad to have some time to test out some of these features that I've been wanting to, because I've tried xCloud in my own house and it's been fine. I wanted to test it out where I would mainly use it, and it worked well. And just finally kind of like reigniting this sort of love for this weird IP. So that's all I've been playing. I have, next time we record, the next time we discuss, I'll have, other things. I wanted to play Outriders. I wanted to play that before I left, and I couldn't because the servers were completely garbage. And Outer Worlds Soulstorm came out, so I haven't been able to touch those yet. I do have them installing, actually, as of recording this. But that's all I've been playing. That's all I've been up to. What have you been playing?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm also in the middle of a move. Well, not also, but I'm in the middle of a move. Yeah. So I'm can't really buy a ton of new games, so I'm kind of reliant on specifically like Game Pass. And luckily, they've had some interesting additions lately. So you mentioned you didn't get the chance to play Outriders. Well, guess what? I did.
There we go.
I did get a chance to dabble in there. So it's one of those things. Well, first off, online games like that, not really my cup of tea. I played it after a lot of the server issues that were happening to people, so luckily I didn't really have to bump into that as much. By the time I got to it, it was like maybe 2 days ago. It was alright. Everything was fairly stable from what I can tell. Played it by myself. It's one of those things, I wouldn't say it's completely trash at all, but it's one of those things that it feels super derivative, like crazy. It feels like a blend of, it's giving me a lot of Gears, obviously, as a cover-based shooter. It's giving me a lot of Halo with the whole kind of sci-fi in the forest kind of aesthetic that they're going for. The way they kind of set up the gameplay style felt very Anthem-y to me. So it was giving me a lot of vibes of various games that I'm very familiar with, that all, I feel like, maybe with exception for Anthem, kind of do it better than this game is doing it. So I don't 100% understand the point of this game. You know what I mean? Like in 2021, this game coming out felt weird. I'm just like, okay, I don't really understand what you guys are trying to do that hasn't been like very much done, down to like the way that the classes are set up and the way they even look and the story, and just I don't know, man. It just wasn't really like hitting me too well. But again, I knew from the beginning it was like not really my cup of tea. I really wanted to just see any opportunity to see a brand new game running on the Series X. I want to see how it looks. I want to see how it performs. Felt good. Looked pretty good. I wouldn't say that it looked definitively next gen. Sometimes you can look at the textures, and I guess the absence of any kind of flickering or jagged textures be like, okay, so there's that, extra 4K polish there. But for the most part, it didn't really sit with me as something I'd probably go back to. But I do highly recommend people give it a shot. It's on Game Pass, so you don't have to have any upfront investment or anything like that. And especially if you can get like a group of friends together, I could definitely see having some fun with this. But it kind of begs the question, it's like, what is the purpose of this game? Like, what is unique about this game that hasn't been done a million times in games very similar to it? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The next one is Narita Boy, which is also on Game Pass. This game is amazing. Really, really awesome game. It gives a lot of kind of 80s arcade vibes. There's something that's very Tronish about it. There's something that gives me a little bit of like Blasphemous vibes, a little bit of Dead Cells. So it's giving me a lot of positive kind of memories of other games that I really, really like. And just the 80s aesthetic and vibe to this game is just phenomenal. The gameplay is very clean. Some of the platforming is not my favorite thing in the world. It gives me very like Luigi platforming, like back on the 2D. You know what I'm talking about? Where like the jump is a little bit like finicky and he slides a little bit on impact. It feels a little bit Luigi-ish to me, which is super not my cup of tea. But with the exception of that specific platform kind of thing, the level design, the character design, everything is just phenomenal. So also on Game Pass, highly, highly recommend you check this one out, Steve. I think you're going to really get a kick out of this one. Right there, it's brand new, so it should be right there on the page. But I gave maybe an hour of gameplay to that and made it decent and really awesome upgrades, and everything is kind of like tied to like a floppy disk, so they're super down on there. It has a really interesting CRT emulation way where, normally when they're trying to emulate older games, they'll put on like scan lines and maybe a blur filter where they play around with the blur filter a little bit, and you can add scan lines if you want, but they also have the thing where they curve the edges inward, if that makes any sense, on the edges, so it looks like you're on a slightly curved display like the old CRTs, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah.
And that looks amazing. I haven't seen too many games play around with that kind of aesthetic. And as like a retro game fan, I've seen a lot of new games try to emulate in retro style, and I feel like this one does it in a very creative and unique way that I highly recommend people check out. So yeah, Game Pass has been on fire lately. I'm really happy. I guess it's worth mentioning I've been playing the hell out of like Fight Night Round 3. It was a game I loved as a kid, and so I saw it pop up on there through EA Play, and I was like, you know what, let me just give that a shot. And yes, that game is still really, really, really fun for anybody who likes combat games in any kind of way, combat sims specifically. The UFC games are pretty fun too, but I've never really liked the grappling portion. Just the way that's designed in that game is confusing to me. And so that's why I like Fight Night, where for the most part, just uppercuts, overhand. Like you just, once you learn a lot of the, targeting system and some of the dodging and blocking mechanics, you're good to go from there. And you just need to have mobility and understand the speed of your fighter. And so a lot of my muscle memory of playing back then definitely came rushing back into me, and I remembered my kind of defense weaving in and out strategy that worked really well back in the day against the boys when they tried to size me up. Didn't work. And so I just jumped right back in and almost in one sitting and beat the entire campaign. I was like, no, come on, man, stop playing with me. So yeah, that game is still tremendous. So if you're looking for a fighting game that's like more like simmy and not like a traditional fighting game, and the UFCs don't really hit you that well, I would say Fight Night Round 3 aged amazingly, looks great on a Series X right now, so give it a shot. But yeah, that's everything I've been playing around with.
Yeah, no, some good stuff. Again, yeah, Outriders, from what you said, and is kind of what I've kind of been going into it thinking, at least when I try it out, I'm like, I play Destiny a little bit more regular. I'm somewhat dabbling in Avengers again. It's like all these kind of that style of game I'm already playing. So what does Outriders, and everyone criticized, from my understanding, Outriders stories and characters. So if that's not there, I don't know what I'm going into.
Yeah, I skipped the hell out of every single cutscene. I ain't gonna lie to you. So,
but yeah, Narita Boy.
Yeah,
super Tron looking. I mean, obviously the cover is a huge nod to Tron. But I'm looking at some of the gameplay. I see what you're talking about, the screen bending.
It's really interesting.
That's really cool. I really got. So this now I know. It's as long as it's got your approval, so I can download it. And again, on Game Pass, so not a big worry. But I'm excited to test those games out today. Then.
Yeah, lots of great stuff on Game Pass lately.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the first story. We have some ones I did not expect, but let's get right into it. So the ESA and E/E3, we finally got an update on them. So, following reports that E3 would be returning this year as a digital event, the Entertainment Software Association, the ESA, has now officially confirmed that E3 2021 will be an online-only affair, and it will be free to watch. There was a lot of rumors of a paywall and all that extra nonsense. Taking place between the 12th and 15th of June, E3 will return as a reimagined all-virtual event, allowing developers to showcase their latest games and news. The ESA will be working with media partners globally to help amplify and make this content available to everyone for free, the ESA said. The show has so far been backed by Nintendo, Xbox, Capcom, Konami, Ubisoft, Take-Two, Interactive, Warner Brothers Games, and Koch Media. That's already a solid lineup, and the ESA promises there are more to come. No, I don't think it's a big surprise that Sony hasn't announced anything for their participation. I'm surprised Nintendo actually sort of working with this again, because they've always been kind of weird, like hosting their Treehouse event or whatever they call it during E3 to be part of it. But we've come kind of full circle. When we first started the NeoVintage podcast, one of the first stories we discussed was the constant mystery of E3 being canceled last year, due to obviously the COVID, the pandemic. So we're here, 50 episodes later, to say that it's back in a form, which we kind of expected it to come back in an all digital event. Things are just starting to get better, so I don't really think we're going to start seeing, in live people events for still a while. But what do you think of this? The E3, that format, the big one, is coming back.
Yeah, it's like weird because I'm like simultaneously of two minds. First off, this year or in the tail end of last year does feel like Night of the Living Dead for me. I swear, with all this like GameStop news and their valuation shooting up and E3 coming back, I'm like, what is going on? Like all these dead bodies coming back to life. But at the same time, in E3's absence last year, seeing all these various shows kind of pop up and be relatively successful. It doesn't surprise me that the ESA is like, well, no, you're not just going to cash in. So if anything, they learned from E3 how to run a showcase, and in many ways, E3 can come back learning from them. So it's kind of like a Uncharted Tomb Raider type situation where you kind of get inspired by the people you inspired. And so, yeah, it makes sense as a digital show. It is nice to kind of have everything in one centralized location because all these kind of disconnected shows can be a bit much in terms of just trying to follow them all. And at the same time, just being completely honest, not all these companies need their own show. You know what I mean? There's the Ubisofts and the Squares that absolutely can run their things. Bethesda, depending on the year, I would say, can run their own show. But there's other ones that they definitely don't need their own event. So having them kind of attached to E3 where you can see, Capcom and Konami and Take-Two, these smaller companies, and smaller I put in quotes, not smaller as in size, but smaller in terms of offerings on a year-to-year basis. Kind of having it all in one location again is a relatively positive thing. I've never been the biggest proponent of E3. However, I did always appreciate having that kind of week of events to look forward to, being like, oh my god, it's E3 week and we're going to get all these announcements. Without E3, some people kind of put their stuff around that time to kind of really fill that void. But generally, last year was kind of just, you get things as they pop up here and there, and there's some stuff in summer and fall and spring. And so kind of having everything back together will be nice. I look forward to it. I'm curious to see the boldness of this show. Like how... Is it really going to just be, them kind of doing an online showcase very similar to some of the other events that we saw last year? Or is this going to be literally them kind of bringing E3 to a digital format in a way that we've never seen before? The pros, the cons, showcasing things, demos. Like, I don't know how they're going to roll this out, but I'm very kind of like cautiously optimistic about them being able to pull something out fun. And I think the big thing is just, obviously Nintendo and Xbox has been communicated something that makes it worth their time to participate, which is cool. I did not expect Nintendo to participate. Sony didn't surprise me at all. They have their own thing. They've had their own thing for some time. They don't really have a need for E3 at all, really. And I feel like the same could probably be said for the big three in general. But Nintendo with their Treehouse format and their Nintendo Directs is just, they've killed it and knocked it out of the park. So I don't know really why they would show up at E3, but I'm not mad at it, and the more people who participate, the better the show is going to be as far as I'm concerned, so I'm down for it.
Yeah, it all seems pretty good. Like, last year, this whole past year, most of these companies had their own event. I know Ubisoft, I think, did two of them that were sort of lackluster, or at least very dragged on. I mean, there was that one that they talked about, Watch Dogs Legions, forever, and look what happened with that.
Yikes.
So having them not to focus on filling an hour, and more just filling a small, or filling multiple hours, kind of just needing to be there, show what you have, and then get out, might help. Maybe Nintendo has. See, I was starting to theorize maybe Nintendo has their tentatively new Switch or whatever there, but I'm like, see, to show off hardware, you want people there and get it hands on, because that's, you want the IGNs and all those people and GameSpots to get that reporting to help sell this system. But we'll have to see exactly what it is. It's obviously hopefully going to be a smaller event. I mean, it's only 3 days, and usually it's like a week long with the pre-press and after-press and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it's just a little bit more organized and back-to-back. You got to, I guess, control the amount of nonsense and all the stuff that's not announcements and talking directly to your consumers. We had that same issue with the Game Awards, where there was just so much crud filling up all this other stuff, where it's like, I'd rather have a shorter, sweeter, better conference than something with 100 announcements and 70 of them are going to be trash.
Yeah, just cut the Ubisoft bloat. Just keep Jason Derulo for another time, please. Just I don't need the whole Just Dance thing. That's one thing I don't miss about E3, and it's not just an E3 issue because again, these individual publishers are the ones making those decisions. But it's like I don't want a return of the bloat of a lot of these conferences before and getting on stage and this whole thing like just announcements back to back. That's why I love the Nintendo format so much. They don't play around. They don't waste your time. We have 13 announcements, and you're going to get about 13 minutes, and just boom, 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 back to back. We show you some gameplay. We give you the date. You keep it pushing. That's the way I like it personally. I like a really tight, chaotic 25 minutes rather than a spaced out 3 hours with some guy sitting on and say, here at Ubisoft, we really care about our gamers. No, I don't need all that, man. But so that's the only thing I care. But again, I can't necessarily expect. Some people like that stuff. Some people like the older kind of spectacle of it, especially like when you look at shows like the Game Awards, which to me is kind of like encapsulate that kind of old style spectacle. Nothing wrong with that. It's not my chosen format, but I'm not mad at it existing. I'm just hoping it edges a little bit more towards just the tighter conferences because I think that's to the benefit of everybody for sure.
Absolutely.
So I guess we can move on from there into the big news of the week. Bloomberg article came out this week, and we got two major kind of revelations from that article. Shout out Jason Schreier over there at Bloomberg. And it's about Last of Us and it's about Sony Bend. We're going to break it into two topics. You'll cover the Sony Bend, I'll cover the Last of Us thing. So I guess let's get started on the Last of Us thing. So Sony Studios are reportedly working on a remake of The Last of Us. And a new Bloomberg report into dissatisfaction among Sony's lesser-known studios. Sources say that a Last of Us remake codenamed T1X was started by Michael Mumbauer, the founder of Visual Arts Service Group, a Sony developer that traditionally assists in development of PlayStation Studio games. Bloomberg sources say that after The Last of Us 2 was completed, Sony moved multiple Naughty Dog developers on the T1X project, and that the remake effectively became a Naughty Dog project. Mumbauer and the original developers have now left the company, but development on the remake is apparently continuing. So this was a very strange revelation as far as I'm concerned. I didn't think that was rumored too much. And just in 2021, a Last of Us remake coming off of Last of Us 2, a game that I believe originally came out in 2013 or something like that.
Yeah,
it hasn't
end of the PS3.
Has not even been 10 years, and I've recently gone back and replayed it, and I think you did the same too. Did you go back and play Last of Us?
right before 2 I did do a playthrough of 1.
Yeah, so it's in both of our minds relatively fresh, and nothing about that game screams needs to be remade at all to me. I mean, I could be in the lone in that, but the PS4 version to me completely still feels like a pretty modern current gen game. Not necessarily PS5, Xbox quality, but no, it feels completely functional. It feels good. The frame rate's good. The visuals are still beautiful. Why you would ever want a remake is just strange to me. The only way I could really think of it is just commercial realities, just running a business and knowing that this is a guaranteed success. And maybe if they felt like they've had coming off a few duds, maybe, and not super recently, because obviously Ghost of Tsushima, people like The Last of Us 2, though critically not the best, sold really well. But maybe they feel like some of the smaller studios have, like Media Molecule and Bend, haven't been really delivering, and so they want some guaranteed funds coming in. Maybe that's the only angle I can make sense of it. But what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I kept thinking about this in multiple ways, and it made zero sense to me. There's no real reason to remake, because the word's not even another remaster. They're talking about remake, and we've seen what Sony does with some of these big remakes. But what are you gonna do? Make it look a little bit better? What are you charging for this remake? Why are you wasting talent? And a lot of this stuff started making sense now. Things that we've seen, the way Sean Layden left, we saw multiple people leave the studio, the companies, and this one, for the next story will be the Sony Bend stuff, but a lot of people from Sony Bend just leaving after what was considered a pretty big success with Days Gone. But The Last of Us, like you said, is not even 10 years old. The original version. On top of that, we got the remastered version on PS4, which works on PS5, and the game looks great, runs great. I don't understand what's there to remake. I'm confused by that. I'm not sure who's asking for it. Because if you're going to come out and say there's now... It would have to be, obviously, a native PS5 Last of Us remake. I mean, what are you going to call it? 2, what are you going to offer in it that's going to give me a reason to go back to it in this format to pay? Because, knowing Sony, they're going to charge $60-$70 for this. I'm just really confused by the whole thought of it. And the fact that they have, again, this is always Sony's big tell. When they don't come out and deny it, it's because it's true. This was the same with the PS Vita, PS3, and PSP store going down. That news broke. They said nothing for a week, and then they made it official. So I would assume we're probably going to hear about this fairly soon. I don't know what it is. I'm hoping it's something... See, I keep hoping that it's something good. I was in a best case scenario in my brain. I was like, well, maybe when they release the new version of Factions or whatever they were going to call it, they would give a Last of Us native PS5 version as well, like bundle it to kind of make it worth buying and stuff like that. Because I think Factions is going to be hard to sell without a game with it. I won't necessarily be too excited. I didn't play too much of Factions in general. I know lots of people did, but it was a good accompaniment to The Last of Us. I think it's going to be hard selling that separate, and I'm thinking maybe in best case scenario, if they're going to just give us a fluffed up version of The Last of Us, maybe not necessarily like a full remake, and bundle that with Factions 2 or whatever they call it to help just, I don't know, make the package more worth it. But then I think who we're dealing with, Sony, and I'm like, that's absolutely not true. They're going to charge as much as they can for both of these projects, and I think it's way past time that The Last of Us kind of needs to take... I'd be okay with never getting another Last of Us game, or if not, at least it needs to be really died down, because there's no reason to have this game. I just don't understand what you're doing. Instead of working on maybe... There's a lot of people who wanted I was in that boat as well. A sort of how they did like the standalone DLC stories.
Yeah.
Wanted one of like Tommy. What was Tommy doing between all of Last of Us 2?
Definitely. And
all that kind of. There are some stories to tell in this universe that still connect. Why are you gonna retell the same story when, companies? There's reviewers who never gave a game a 10 out of 10. This is what they gave it. Now you're gonna remake it. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I'm hoping really that they come out and clear this out quick, because the longer they just sit there quiet, the more fire they're gonna get. Because on Twitter, it's been constant berating on all of them. There's people even asking Sean Layden, and he kind of just tweets images like, I don't know. He doesn't really want to say anything, because man, because the guy who's what's his name, Jim Ryan, it's just weird that they're starting to make the mistakes that like Xbox and Nintendo have learned from.
Yeah.
When for some reason they went and I remember on Xbox One days they went and remade just Gears of War 1. That was it. They didn't do a collection of the original 3, and it's like we didn't. Though that was the game that needed it most. I was like, why not do a bundle? There's just a lot of these dumb mistakes you're doing, and we'll get into it more. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want and don't need a Last of Us remake. Because it's there on my shelf, a PS4 game.
Yeah, it's tricky, and it's one of those things. I just can't help but feel like this is definitely not the best use of the immense talent that they have there, and just I feel like Sony's in a weird place where the energy. The last time I felt the energy from the Sony ecosystem right now, it feels to me a lot like the late PS2 Sony. Where they're coming off of immense success, and the people talk about it, the Sony hubris, where they just make these almost like you can't even wrap your head around some of the decisions they're making, and it's just because they're coming off of that immense success. They think they are God, they can do just about anything, and you're gonna buy it, and that's what this gives the vibe of, where it's just like, well, we'll make this because you'll buy it, and though that is true to an extent. No one is too big to fail. No one. We've seen that time and time again. Name one of the big three, and I can point you to a time where they were doing phenomenally, and I can tell you where they fell right flat on their face before too. And I just get the vibe that Sony is heading towards a weird era that I don't necessarily think we're going to get another PS3 because I don't think they'll end up in that place again because we had the PS3. That happened, so they know what to consciously avoid in that regard. But I feel like there's definitely a disconnect between the Sony that had been making all these amazing decisions last gen and what the players want and what their vision for the PS5 seems to be. And I just worry sometimes about their trajectory, especially now because I feel like we're in a place where all three are on it. And the only reason Microsoft's not nipping on their heels is because, again, they had a lot of catching up to do. And Nintendo with the Switch has been killing it too. And so there's no room for error for any of these three. You slip, you're done. And so you need to be on top of your game. And Sony has absolutely had an immense lead because of the success of the PS4 and having such amazing games out of the gate for the launch of the PS5. But again, you're never, until you're across the finish line, you're not across the finish line. And so I just worry about them. And the next story, once you get into that, paints this picture a little bit even more, where it seems like the disconnect is not just with the players and not just with the vision by whatever higher-ups are in charge, but also with their own developers. It seems like there's a disconnect there, which is concerning because that level of like incongruence in Sony will have ripple effects. And it might not be in a year, it might not be in 2 years, but by the end of this generation, I think you're going to see the ripple effects of the lack of kind of synchronicity in the kind of like the Sony family. But yeah, I guess we can get into the next story then.
Yeah, let's get into it because it's even sadder in certain aspects. So the Bloomberg article continues to say that Sony Bend pitched a sequel to Days Gone after the game's release in 2019, but was rejected. Sony then apparently moved Bend developers onto two Naughty Dog projects, a multiplayer game, which is presumably the standalone Last of Us multiplayer game, The Factions, and a new Uncharted project, which has been rumored recently at a different Sony studio. But some Bend staff reportedly left as a result of having their autonomy taken away, and leadership allegedly complained to Sony and asked to be moved off the Uncharted development. Sony Bend is now apparently working on a new original game, but it is unclear if it is Days Gone 2, a brand new game, or a return to another back catalog game. Eurogamer reports that the sources claimed a Sony Bend developer Uncharted game was planned to be a new chapter for the series, possibly a prequel, and was intended as something of a reboot for the series. It's unclear if those plans have persisted with Bend on or off the project. So, yeah, I went in since Days Gone released, seeing it on the charts and people kind of talking about how well it was. I know it kind of came out, rocky because of the patches it needed and things like that. But from my understanding and from my gut feeling, I thought Days Gone 2 was in the works and that was it. I thought it was for sure greenlit, or at least they were doing their next game they wanted to do. Finding out that they may have been started being chopped up and folded into Naughty Dog to do multiplayer, and who knows, maybe this Last of Us remake and Uncharted that was apparently being made at that other Sony studio that I don't even think has been named yet. Everything in here was just like a blow to the chest. Like, no Days Gone 2 tentatively, Sony Bend not being able to just produce another game, and now them being pushed to support when they've shown that they can make a game. Days Gone, past all that stuff, is a really solid game and a good game. Most people who play it are like, yeah, this is a solid good game. I would love to see more of this, to see what Uncharted was and what Uncharted 2 became. I was like, I would love to see what Days Gone was and to see what Days Gone 2 or whatever the version of that sequel would be. So it's just terrible to know that Sony's, and I understand this is all speculation and stuff, but again, the fact that Sony has not come out and said anything. If you look at the last year, how many people have been shifting around Sony Bend, leaving Sony Bend, and all this kind of stuff, like the writers and story and all these other people who've been leaving, are kind of up there and necessary for the beginning of a game. That's when you do the story writing. That's when you do the sort of planning and stuff like that. You know, the mocap and all that stuff comes out later, but it makes a little bit more sense, but it just sucks because this is a bad look, and this is, like you were saying, a sort of nosediving for Sony a little bit, where it's just like you guys were at a high, so obviously you had, you know, nowhere to go except staying where you were or dropping a little bit. And these are the moves that scares us when, you know, they start closing studios down and people start just leaving unexplained, and it's worrisome. So this is not what I want to see out of Sony Bend. I do hope that they are making either, you know, the sequel to Days Gone 2 or something else they really wanted to make. I just don't think Sony Bend needs to be pushed back after finally climbing up to a new level, being pushed back down to support studio and porting, and just, it doesn't need that, especially when Sony kind of needs these teams right now. Xbox has what a power card if you go look at the teams Xbox has. Now, the titles aren't there just yet, but in a couple years, when we are getting Uncharted 2, the remake, and all these other remakes, Xbox is going to be knocking out of the park with some of these big guys, especially now with Bethesda under their wing and all these other companies that they just have. And once Ninja Theory starts getting all these their games out, it's going to be a rough time for Sony if they're going to start chopping their teams up to support their big ones. And I just don't think that's what we need. So what do you think of this? I know you were actually a fan of Days Gone as well.
Definitely, and I would consider myself at this point pretty much a Bend fan, and I really, really appreciate what they were doing. And the biggest thing that I appreciate about it is just I love the journey that some of these studios have in terms of jumping to that next level. And I feel like Bend had their technical issues with Days Gone when it came out. Absolutely, that game was really, it had a lot of issues. But they really kind of turned it around, and I think they made a really solid project. And I would say, a caveat, if this story is true, and I'm not casting any doubt on Jason Schreier's ability to research, I'm just saying we haven't had formal confirmation one direction or another. But if this story is true, I think it's incredibly disrespectful from Sony to Bend to treat them, as you mentioned, like a support studio, like the people who made Days Gone as a support studio. And the best way I could describe this is just, it doesn't seem like Sony seems to appreciate scale of project and relative scale specifically. For example, like Nintendo, they'll drop and they'll have their Marios and their Zeldas, but there's a place for a Kirby. There's a place for smaller remakes. There's a place for smaller, almost indie-like games. And they all could be part of the Nintendo first-party family. When you have Microsoft, yes, you have the Forzas and the Halos and the Gears, but we'll have our Oris too. We'll allow Obsidian to do Grounded as some weird survival thing, and it doesn't have to have that same results. But it doesn't seem that Sony feels that way. That when you release a game like a Days Gone or a Detroit and it doesn't hit the levels, you're done. You're done. And I feel like that doesn't instill trust on behalf of the developer towards Sony, where it's like, okay, we're a smaller team. They know that this is kind of a newer foray, but yet they're holding us seemingly to this standard that if we can't perform and hit these millions and millions and millions in Horizon level sales, we're going to be booted to some kind of support team. Like, so it doesn't surprise me that people want to leave, because it just seems, and I wouldn't throw like a toxic environment on them, but it doesn't seem conducive to like kind of a like, do what you do best. But the problem is, it doesn't seem to be evenly distributed that way. Because, and I'm not the first one to raise this point, but one of the first things I thought about is like, you're not treating Media Molecule like this. At no point did I ever see them pulled off Dreams and be like, okay, nobody bought your engine game, so we're gonna have you, helping out on the next Astros game. I've never heard that story. So, Bend turned it around. They fixed their game. They made a really cool zombie game, which is not easy to do in this day and age because, again, zombie games have been done to death. They made a decent one. It's set in the Pacific Northwest. Cool bike mechanics. I liked it. And they had a really cool Horde system that they were able to make that run on PS4 hardware pretty late into its life cycle. And then for them to be like, okay, you didn't have the results that we wanted, you're done. So we're going to take away your autonomy and basically divvy you up onto doing a new Uncharted program. Almost, and to me, I think it's even more disrespectful. So you have Uncharted by Naughty Dog, this incredibly successful franchise, insane standard you're going to be held to, and then you're going to just throw Bend onto that. It's like almost setting them up for failure again. It's like you want to put them into a situation where, okay, you feel like they couldn't deliver this experience, so we're gonna put you on this franchise with one of the best game studios ever to exist, having developed it previously. And if that doesn't, what are you gonna do? Break them apart if that doesn't succeed too? Because then you have justification to flop projects. You know what I mean? And how long was it that Media Molecule took to make Dreams? And then Dreams comes out, and I'm not crapping on Dreams at all. I'm just pointing out that the application doesn't seem even. That it seems like they're holding Bend to a certain standard that they're not holding necessarily all of their teams, and I don't necessarily think that's fair. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people from Bend are like, okay, I'm out of here. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem right for a studio, because I don't see many studios that you could take from basically making handheld games and then make them make a full-scale console game and deliver something like Days Gone. And even a studio like Game Freak, that's been around how long? Look at their games now. It's not easy to make a full console game. You know what I mean? Like, those things are not without flaws. And again, I love Game Freak, but again, they're a handheld team, and that jump is not easy to make. And we have plenty of evidence for that. And just, I feel like it's a little disrespectful, personally. And again, it's speculative right now. We don't have all the information. We haven't heard from Sony, but based on the information I've read, it doesn't seem like they're treating them right. And I don't think that they're treating everybody on equal standing for some reason.
Yeah, it really is just super bizarre. I mean, it's just tear them apart after they proved themselves. Gotta remember, Sony Bend did do Golden Abyss, Uncharted Golden Abyss on Vita.
Good game.
So it's like, I understand that they've proven themselves with these titles. You guys let Vita fail. So good thing they had Days Gone, because what if they were working on another Vita game? As we know, that'd be pretty much shot in the foot now. So it's like, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense. I look at it in every single way. I'm like, why do you guys think we don't want another Days Gone, or want Sony Bend to be their own thing? I want Sony Bend to be their own thing. I don't even necessarily, even if they were like making a smaller game first and then going to Days Gone way later on, I'd be okay with that, obviously, or something to incorporate that sort of horde mode into their next game, because that horde mode, which is one of the best parts of Days Gone, is so hidden so late in the game. So to have something that almost even more mechanically works with that, it just would make sense. It's sad to say and see, actually, and again, it's technically all speculative and rumors, but I mean, again, these guys do their research pretty well and confidential. So again, and Sony has taken so long to say nothing at all. So they're going to be under a microscope for any announcement that they make and anything they're going to say. They really have to keep it clutch and keep it honest, and hopefully fix the rumors and fix their stuff straight. Because I just don't want my PS5 to be an Uncharted and Last of Us machine. That's not what I got it for. So that thought process doesn't work, or else the Xbox would have sold just for Halo and Gears, and we know that doesn't work that way. So hopefully we get some clarification soon and see what these guys actually feeling or working on.
Yeah, and I think for the sake of devil's advocate, I think there is room to give Sony some benefit of the doubt in the way that, so you and I pay pretty close attention to the kind of Sony and PlayStation ecosystem. We do know that there is a collaborative kind of culture there where teams help each other out. You know what I mean? So Sony Santa Monica absolutely helps out other teams and projects, and depending on the scale of the project, we know that happens for sure. People from Naughty Dog will help, especially like if you're playing around with somebody else's engine, they help out. So that happens. So it could be just giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like, let's say they did make a pitch for Days Gone 2, and they were like, you know what, we're kind of only looking for major hits. And I would take issue with that, but it's fine. They're like, okay, listen, we're not really interested in doing a Days Gone 2, but if you have any original IP, feel free to pitch that, and we'll take it to strong consideration. And so maybe the combination of the stories of them not liking getting Days Gone 2 not approved, and maybe just the normal collaboration looks away in totality. So maybe they're not made into a complete support studio. They've just been effectively working at that because their main IP didn't get approved yet. Maybe. Just kind of throwing a little bit of leeway for Sony there, where it's like maybe they weren't made into a support studio, but they were helping out with existing projects. already. They didn't get their main IP, so they kind of had to continue as that kind of support-like team. But that's not something that's going to be existing in perpetuity. They just need to get a main project of their own approved. That's just an idea that I was kind of thinking about, as this story was kind of going along. But again, it doesn't look great, and they need to clear this up, because I just would hate to see a team as talented as I think Bend is to be treated this way.
Absolutely.
So I guess we can kind of cap off the show with another let's talk about topic, for our loose topic. And we've done it on Final Fantasy. We've done it on Sonic. So this week I wanted to throw Steve a little bit of an alley-oop here. And we're going to talk about Street Fighter. Now, I don't think this needs a massive introduction. One of the most, if not the most iconic fighting game franchises of all time. It's been around for quite a while. It's been iterated upon multiple times, has different art styles, gameplay styles. It's changed a lot since when it started, but I feel like in many ways it's been one of the few fighting game franchises to really retain a spirit in a really unique way that I feel like not a lot of fighting franchises haven't had as much success doing. Without completely rehauling what it's all about. And I felt like, generally speaking, you take Street Fighter the original, you take Street Fighter 2, and then you compare it to Street Fighter 5, the spirit to me is still very much there. And there have been games where they've deviated from that a lot more, and the fans have responded appropriately to that. But I feel like in many ways it's retained the spirit. It looks better, it plays better, has awesome characters, really creative design. But at the same time, I feel like if you snatch somebody from the 80s and show them Street Fighter 1, and it's like, hey, things have advanced a lot in the time you've checked this out, 2021 Street Fighter 5, what do you think? And it's like, oh yeah, that's still Street Fighter. It plays a hell of a lot better, but this is Street Fighter. So yeah, I know you're a massive fighting game fan, so I just want to get a semblance. What are your thoughts on Street Fighter?
Yeah, so Street Fighter's done something that, most fighting games couldn't. It's easy, I guess it's not easy, but it's easy to see where certain games are still being made, and such a straight series is, on part whatever, again, like we were saying, Final Fantasy's on part 16, including all these other things, and for Street Fighter, it was such a weird thing, because if you look at Street Fighter 1, nobody really talks about Street Fighter 1, but so much of that encapsulates, like, it all starts with Street Fighter 1, from some certain characters appearing and things like that. But like you said, one thing it was able to do is to never really lose, I would say, except for Street Fighter EX, it never lost its it's never lost its identity. Like you said, you see this evolution between Street Fighter to 2 to Alpha. Again, we're gonna ignore EX and not talk about any of the crossover series right now, but to 3 to 4 to 5, you see the gradual jumps in technology, the jumps in artwork, the jumps in styles, and the jumps in gameplays, where people really like Street Fighter 2, but Street Fighter 2 is sort of tanky, and that tanky feel is rarely prominent in Street Fighter 4. People really like the speed of Street Fighter 3 and stuff, and you see a lot of that speed and stuff back in Street Fighter 5. So it's like they understand, but again, besides some stumbles here and there, they understand a balance. And I think Street Fighter 5, obviously being the newest game and all that kind of stuff, has like a good balance of that hard sort of campy, you can hit all the buttons at once and you're not going to really do much moves and things like that. But it's one of those it's one of those series that's, I would assume, would just always be around, due to the fact that they play loose and go with the story. I play most of the story, and I know there's some tying stories, but most of the people, let's all admit, Street Fighter story doesn't really matter that much, especially since the fact that like Street Fighter 3 takes place after, they don't matter where it comes. Street Fighter 5 takes place before 4, and all these weird things they do timeline wise, but that's not something we really play. Street Fighter 5 launched without a story mode until months after. But it's that sort of iconic character where you can almost pull any character, even if you ignore Ryu and Ken, obviously the big guys. If you pull any of these characters and put them in anywhere else, a Street Fighter character when you look at it. A Street Fighter ripoff when you look at a Street Fighter ripoff. And it's done something that most people couldn't, and it's a flagship series that has sold like 40-something million units worldwide. And there's a reason for that, and it's not only their support and the studio still making the game, obviously Capcom and everyone who's helped, it's been in different hands, but it's also the fan base that is there. There's a reason that Street Fighter 2 went through so many iterations and stuck around for so long, and is still, again, COVID shut down so many tournaments, but it would still appear at tournaments and stuff like that. I mean, we just got a Street Fighter 2 game on Switch. Remember, at launch we had a Street Fighter 2 game.
Yeah.
So it's not really meant. I didn't see them releasing Mortal Kombat 2 on Switch. Not that anybody would really want those games. Mortal Kombat's a different story.
Yeah.
But that speaks to how good and solid these games, when an old game like that can be brought back. And it's like almost like the Melee paradox for Smash Bros., where people stick by Melee. They say it plays great and all that stuff. Debatable, but Street Fighter 2 though is a super solid game. And that's why these games try to emulate it and hold it on high esteem. So it's not the perfect fighting game, but it's pretty much up there. Like, if you were gonna make a fighting game, you want to sort of encapsulate the worlds. You have to model your format, not necessarily the gameplay and characters and stuff, but you want to hit the impact that Street Fighter did.
Yeah, definitely. And there's one thing that some people would look at as a negative, but I've always had a lot of respect for them, which is Street Fighter managed to figure out the DLC re-release format way before anybody else did, before the tech was even there. They were just dropping 3 or 4 versions of a game with, marginal changes, some maps added, some characters added. I mean, that's DLC drops right there. And they managed to figure it off and sell it to their customers, and people were like, you know what? Fine, we'll make it work. And not many fighters could have done that. Not Virtual Fighter. Yeah, I would have loved to see Virtual Fighter come out and be like, we're gonna re-release this game 4 times with marginal differences, and you guys are gonna buy it every time and be like, yo, please kick rocks. So I gotta give them credit there. Whereas, like, in many ways, I can blame Street Fighter for a lot of the current state of the fighting game release format. But at the same time, you got to respect that. How many versions of 2 have they released? And people ate up every single one of them. So it's like, good for them. So I guess the natural question would be, so you are overwhelmingly familiar with pretty much every iteration of Street Fighter. They all have their pros and cons, all have different sets of characters and vibes and feels. They've come out over many different consoles. And taking advantage of different pieces of tech and stuff like that. What would you say if gun to your head, choose one Street Fighter to play for forever, and you can't touch any of the other ones forever? Which one are you choosing?
So that's a hard one. Okay. But I would have to go, and we actually spoke a little bit of this up before recording, and it would be Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And I choose this, and I know that one's held fairly highly. I understand that, they made an online edition, and this is always there and stuff. And I choose the Third Strike because that is the third iteration. We had Street Fighter 3 New Generation, Street Fighter 2 Second Impact, and then Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which is the final version. And I think the online edition they did for PS4, 3, or whatever, they added another character or something like that. But I'm going to refer to it as just the Third Strike one. And it would be that one mainly because of how it's hit that balance. I always say that there's a balance in Street Fighter where there's characters that are super slow, tanky, don't really feel like they fit in Street Fighter, but they do. On top of that, you have the quick characters. You have the Chun-Lis who are jumping around. Even Ryu and Ken are not that super speed that they have. In Street Fighter 5, obviously, the whole gameplay was sort of turbo mode and upscale and stuff like that, and that's why you see the turbo modes in the older ones. But I think Street Fighter 3 hits the right amount of just a perfect fighting game, where it's about the characters and it's about the fighting, and that's really what you want. There is some story modes and stuff like that, but it refined a lot of the previous game's mechanics, its rules, its style, and it really helps cement what Street Fighter should be. So when they're making a new Street Fighter game, I assume they have all the Street Fighters obviously in-house, but this is the one where they're like, listen, people really like this one, and things like that. And it's funny because for the online edition, Iron Galaxy is the one who helped port that to the newer systems, and they went on to make the new Killer Instinct.
Yeah.
So you see that people are the ones who are like, they're keeping an eye on it, because they know that this is the pinnacle game. It's also the cast that gets the wildest before 5, obviously, but this is where a lot of these characters from 5 showed up, and they get just crazy wild. I mean, you got guys with crazy hair, and I know there's some characters jumping back and forth and stuff like that. But it just hit a time where it was perfect. This was, I want to say the last time it was released was like 99. Yeah, so 1999. So it has enough identity to be its own game, but also have the years of just games at this point, almost a decade of what Street Fighter was, built into a nice package. So that's why I'm always like, well, that has to be the one. Like, if I could only ever play one, I'm not going to play Street Fighter 1. But this would be the one where I can comfortably sit down and play without any issues.
Yeah, and this was tricky for me, too, because I kind of bounced back and forth between two of them. So a close number 2 for me is Ultra Street Fighter 4. I love that last iteration of it, just with all the characters and stuff like that. That was such a good time for Street Fighter for me personally, that I just played the hell out of the game, and I had to finally pick up. I picked up a physical of that. I'm like, wait, do I not have that in my collection? So I was able to get a copy of that, and it's just I load that up to the PS3. And I'm like, man, this game is good. Like, I love it so much. But I have to be honest, and I was like, asking myself the question, like, if I could only play one, what the thing is, like, it's like, well, I've been in that situation before. Growing up, I only had one Street Fighter game that I played the hell out of, and it had to be Alpha 3. I've been in that situation where I played nothing but Alpha 3 for literally, probably like close to 8 to 10 years, just playing that over and over and over and over again. The roster in that, the art style. Now, I understand, some people debate not mainline version, whatever, spinoff. But for me, when I think Street Fighter, I think 2, and I think of Alpha 3, and I just love the way it looks. I remember playing the hell out of that on Game Boy specifically. They had an awesome Game Boy version, and then they had an awesome PSP version too. So just being able to have that on the go, and it runs great. The art style is amazing. Massive roster, awesome maps. With amazing animations in the background, and I think it just aged really well. And if you look at the 2D fighter market right now, specifically the 2D anime fighter market, so much of the heritage of those games come from Alpha 3. So in many ways, it's funny how like Street Fighters kind of moved past that whole era and that gameplay style, and they're kind of off that. But in many ways, if you like look at the industry, the kind of the ancestors of that, or the predecessors of that, still kind of linger around to this day, and I think it's really good. It's really, really awesome. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you, like you were saying, if you look at those new 2D fighters, they obviously, like, Street Fighter was doing it first, and it's interesting that you really liked Street Fighter, and I know you have such a big heritage with Street Fighter 2 as well, and Street Fighter Alpha 3 technically is a prequel to Street Fighter 2. Yeah. If I remember this correctly. So it's like, it's that world that you really enjoy as well. So to have that string just pulling you with those two games just makes so much sense. Yeah,
there's kind of just a thread between those two games and that kind of era that I just am really, really fond of. And again, I feel like Street Fighter's just had its weird, not necessarily ups and downs, just very unique eras that you can't necessarily say with the other, like a lot of other franchises. Like, I think Mortal Kombat has definite eras for sure, but like games like if you think of like Tekken and DOA, it's been pretty linear. It's pretty just from game to game to game. Everybody has their kind of favorites and stuff like that, but for the most part, Tekken's been very consistent and stuff like that. And Nintendo has their own kind of deal with the whole Smash Brothers thing, but I feel like the ability for it to reinvent itself, it's definitely like the Kanye of fighting games for sure, where it's just like each game you're getting something almost like fundamentally different, but at the same time somehow it's still Street Fighter, if that makes any sense, which is not an easy thing to do whatsoever. So I guess the nice way that we like to kind of cap off these segments is we've talked about our favorites, the natural places to go to our least favorites, and then we can kind of end off the subject with where we would like to see it go in the future and what changes, or if we wanted to revert back to an older style, what we would like that to look like. So I want to start off with you. Do you have a least favorite? Because it's okay if you don't, but do you have a least favorite Street Fighter game?
I would have to give it to the EX. I just didn't remember there was 3 EX games. I'm just looking at them now, that there's 3 of these. But I know Street Fighter EX3 is the one that I remember the most because of how much I didn't like it. because it was trying to be the DOA, the Tekken. You know, it just didn't fit what I felt Street Fighter should be. It's not necessarily a bad game. I don't remember how it was critically received. You know, it's got okay reviews. People obviously saying it's looks dull and ugly compared to the spectrum that you see in Street Fighter 3 and stuff, and it makes sense. You know, this is in the era PS2. Everyone thought everything had to be 3D polygons and stuff like that, so it makes sense that it was not held so high. And it's also the one I never want to go play those. Yeah. I do need to get those just for collecting purposes, but if I don't, I'll die. Okay, I'll be okay when I'm dead. And I'm like, oh man, I never got the 3 Street Fighter EX games. It just never really made sense. And I remember in one of these, that's how much I don't play the series. They started adding like customizable moves, and that kind of throws the balance off in Street Fighter when the character, it's all about the combos and the moves you can do. And that's my issue with certain fighting games, Injustice and Mortal Kombat, where you know every little tweak makes the game different and stuff like that. So that's an issue for me, because I should be able to go to anyone's place, pick up my character, and they should play the way I want them to. And that was an issue I had with, even when I was younger and didn't really understand these fighting games that much. For this Street Fighter, when I was like, why is your Ryu playing different than my Ryu? And it's not much combos that are different, but it just makes a whole balance just completely off, which is why I put that one on the bottom for me.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So, like, obviously, yeah, I've only played that game, like, maybe once or twice. I definitely forgive him for that just because, I mean, literally every franchise tried the 3D thing out at that point. Like, even Mortal Kombat was throwing it, you know, around, like, Mortal Kombat was a 4, I think, at that point. They were trying to do some weird stuff, too. So, I'll forgive them. As long as they didn't double down and they kind of moved on pretty quickly from those. And it's like, all right, we'll try something else. For me, going back and playing all of them, because I have the collection, the first one is probably my least favorite, and it's not because it's not good, just so much it's a lot cruder, and it's been improved upon so much since then. So just by proxy, it's probably the weakest of the mainline franchise for sure, the numbered 5. But yeah, it's the first one, but I wouldn't say the first one's bad. It's just the weakest of those if I had to choose.
Absolutely.
So also I would like to ask, it's just fun to ask, do you have a favorite character?
Yeah, so some reason, I don't understand why, but every Street Fighter game, I always go to Akuma.
Okay.
I don't know if it was just wanting the edgy, dark version of Ryu or what it was. So he's my kind of default. But I always like to mess with Cody. He's usually in the prison outfit. In Street Fighter 5, he's like a mayor of of a city. And he actually didn't, and I understand Cody didn't start in Street Fighter and things like that. But so Akuma, Cody, and for some reason Cammy has always been a big one. I like her style, I like her moveset. There's something about her. That character I always liked.
Yeah, me too.
You know, even before you like learn the story of who she is and what, you know, the clone system and all that kind of stuff, I just liked Cammy. That was just her moveset just spoke to me. What about you?
Yeah, so I actually really like Cammy as well. I've always kind of gravitated in the older games. I'm definitely a Vega guy for sure. I've always just liked I found like his kind of like kinetic style has always lent itself really well to the way I play. That kind of just very flip oriented, you know, getting off the wall, clearing, just a lot of mobility works really well with Vega, and his speed has really, you know, played well with me. And it's also my last name, so that's nice too. And I would say if you get towards more the modern iteration, obviously like when it comes to 4, I'm only playing Poison. I've only ever played Poison. There's just something, just something about her style, and so it kind of, I'm very much like depends on the game is where I'm gonna play, and so like Cammy and Vega are definitely like the most kind of consistent back and forth that I've personally made.
Oh yeah, good ones. And I knew about the Vega one obviously because the Easter egg for your life,
no doubt. And so naturally, okay, so I'm gonna pitch it right here. Street Fighter 6 comes out maybe in a couple years from now. What do you think that looks like? What would you like it to look like? If we're talking about a roster, cast-wise, do you like the more limited approach that they went with 5, and then they kind of bring out the season approach? Do you like closer to like the older system where, like by Alpha 3, you have everybody in it? So what's your kind of vision for Street Fighter 6?
So that's a hard one, and I've thought about this for a while because every year I'm like, well, Street Fighter V's got to be over. We've had Street Fighter V almost the entirety of the PlayStation 4's life cycle, and it's like, well, what do I see? Because, like we said, most of these games almost come out in like eras, where Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3 was a natural evolution in certain aspects. Street Fighter 4 then was more connected to 2, and I would say 5 is more connected to 3 because of the speed. I don't know exactly where it goes from here. Obviously Street Fighter 5 kind of took everything they've learned and put it together. The art style is very similar to Street Fighter 4's, but the gameplay is a whole lot faster. And I think that's something everyone can admit, is the gameplay is a whole lot faster and everything like that. But when I encapsulate in my mind, when I start to paint, because gameplay is going to be pretty much similar. There obviously will change certain combos and mechanics, and they still do that with updates with these games. Every time they do these big ones, and you end up with all these EX moves and all the special stuff that wasn't in the game at launch. But when I think Street Fighter 6, which obviously has to be in some sort of early development, late development, who knows what, that could be announced at any time, and I would believe it. So it's interesting. I would like to see a different art style. The sort of super heavy, like, cell shaded stuff that we saw in 4 and was kind of refined and cleaned up in 3, like the textures and the muscles and stuff like that. I don't really know what that looks like. I'm not in any way good at art and stuff, so I don't know what that even means. Obviously, I don't want the next Street Fighter to just look like an Arc Systems games. I don't want that, because just as much as it look cool and sharp, I just don't know if that's where Street Fighter needs to be. I think this sort of 2.5 3D aspect is correct. I just don't know what art style I would want it. For my biggest thing is how it launches from the beginning, and that's an issue that we had with Street Fighter V, which launched with a handful of characters. I mean, you had some staples of the series not even in the game at launch, Guile and all these people who just were missing. And I knew they had obviously a DLC plan, and we can't fault them for the DLC plan. I do wish it was a little less microtransaction. I'm okay with paying with, like, for characters and, like, these big system updates. I feel like they've hit the right way. Like, if you had the original Street Fighter V and you launch it right now, you're gonna have the Champion Edition, because that part is always free and stuff. I think that's good, keeping the mechanics and stuff free. I'm okay with having to do the charging for, like, the season pass and stuff. That's all staples in it. But I do think you need a stronger foundation. I do think story-wise, it is time for somewhat of a reboot, or a less focus. Because, I mean, this whole thing with Shadow Lu and Bison, and he's old in Street Fighter V, and there's all this stuff that just, like, this rivalry that just still is so stagnant and stuff. It'd be interesting to see them take a different approach to the story mode, not necessarily like NetherRealms, which goes super Spielberg or Michael Bay with their story mode, but something a little bit more hardcore, focusing on certain characters, and building that relationship again to kind of reintroduce these characters to the fan base. Because you got to remember, I mean, this series started in '87. There's people still finding Street Fighter now, and having them a good entry point. With Street Fighter 6 being on the new systems and new generation, in a new world where people are going to start reconnecting in person once these vaccines and all this kind of stuff start working together. It'll be interesting. It'd be great to have that also just be like a new platform for Street Fighter. Not that it'll ever be like a platform game where you buy one and that'll be it forever, but Street Fighter 6 should be able to be a new entry point where Street Fighter 5, you jump into that story mode, you don't know who the characters are, you don't know what's going on. This whole nonsense with Shadow Lu and the darkness and Ryu is a thing that we've dealt with on and off for these games because of the timeline issue. Having a more consecutive timeline where in a world where Street Fighter 6 happens and then whatever Street Fighter 7 and however many years happens would be direct sequels, and these storylines can help flesh out some of these characters. And I know I speak that as such a big fighting game fan, where some of these games have really started to do that. And I know Street Fighter is just kind of known for not putting their story up front and things like that, which is weird. But I think that's where we need it to be, not necessarily a reboot where they erase everything, but a new entry. Hopefully not like a time jumble that Mortal Kombat did. They just pulled that off miraculously where they reset their theory. But to the fact that you could jump into Street Fighter 6, play a story mode that's great, and then just have the cast that's there. I do think you need a little bit more. I know the size of a roster doesn't matter the greatest for Street Fighter. It's obviously about the actual fighting. I think it does matter to a certain extent. We launched with such a... I mean, it's great now when you look at the roster, but you got to give us a little bit more bang for our buck here, especially for Street Fighter games and fans that have, spent years learning their characters. And I understand not every character can be in every game, but to then just give them 8 characters, 6 characters, that to me is a little rough.
Yeah, I've also given this considerable thought as well. I guess I could break this down. So, like, from like a art style, I'm not sure where they go from there. I actually kind of like the way it looks right now, so just cleaning it up with higher resolution textures is fine with me personally. I don't think that needs a major rehaul. Though I love a kind of Arc System Works-ish approach to like an Alpha 4 for Street Fighter 6. I definitely don't think that's where the mainline franchise should go. I agree with you on that one. Though I'd like, again, in Alpha 4, I would like it to be its own kind of separate, distinct thing. I don't want them to necessarily drag everybody into that, because I really don't think that gameplay style is for everybody. But I think the biggest differentiating factor, between 5 and 6 has to be less about the way it looks and more so about taking advantage of the tech. And what that looks like, I don't 100% know, but I feel like there are insane leaps forward. So if you take where tech was when 5 came out and where maybe like 4 was ending off, the beginning of that PS4 generation, and where we are now, what the PS5 is truly capable of processing, I think there are some immense things that the fighting game community could take advantage of. Just like, what does a fighting game look like with real dedicated 120 frames per second? What does that look like when you can fully render multiple characters on screen doing elaborate thing with zero slowdown? What does that look? And I feel like it's about time that maybe we bring the fighting game community into kind of the where the first person shooters have been with the Twitch shooters, where you kind of have like response, like in zero latency, crazy response fighting games. I'd love to see what Street Fighter does with that amount of tech, and I feel like it's going to be a little bit meta, and a lot of people are going to be playing it and be like, I can't tell the difference, but that's kind of the nature of like 4K and 120 frames per second, you know what I mean? But I feel like that's going to be the major differentiator between 5 and 6 is the tech and what they're just able to process on these incredible machines. In terms of a roster, I do not like the drip feed approach that they have nowadays. It's obviously not just a Street Fighter issue, it's kind of just the way kind of fighting games have chosen to monetize themselves these past few years. So I'm not mad at it, but it's certainly not my preferred way. I don't necessarily feel like they need to do, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with literally everybody. I don't think they have to do that. But I think to launch, the core people, have everybody from the core experience, and then brand new characters, I think would be really, really cool as well. So I'm less focused about them bringing, all the various brand new 5 people in, but having all the core people and 6 people, you know what I mean? I think that's the important thing. But that has to all be available at launch. And if it's not available at launch, then maybe it's time for you to, push off the game a little bit. But this whole thing where you're missing, staples of the franchise at launch is crazy to me, and that's not the way to go. But I think they need to find a way to not break people over the head with having to buy all this stuff, but at the same time give people distinct reasons to go to Street Fighter 6 versus just having 5 again. And I think the major change is going to be what this game is able to perform on just on a technical level, and less so what it looks like or whatever gimmicks they try to add into it. I think the format works. I think the combo system and the kind of meta game of that way over my pay grade, so I can't speak on that. But I know they've kind of gotten down and mastered that. I think that needs to remain whole, but I think there are ways to take advantage of these new pieces of hardware that could be absolutely to the benefit of these games, that the people who spend enough time with it and who are familiar enough with the franchise would be able to tell immediately, like, oh yeah, they clean this up like crazy. Like, just imagine just zero slowdown, zero latency. If you're playing with multiple people on screen, they're all rendered completely. And I just think that there's just immense capabilities on these newer pieces of hardware that 6 I would imagine is going to take advantage of it, or at least I hope so. Fingers crossed. But yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts on it. Either way, I feel like they've been in a real positive direction for quite a while now. So I have a lot of faith that 6 is probably going to be really, really solid. I really like what 5 is right now. And I was not super impressed with 5 when it came out, and they've really turned it around on 5. So yeah, I have a lot of faith that even if I don't love 6 when it comes out, I'm sure in 5 years when they have their 16th iteration that they drop that, by that point it'll be really, really solid.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, man, that's Street Fighter, and I'm sure this is going to be the first of multiple parts of various fighting game franchises I'd like to tap into. I kind of compiled a little bit of a list, and you're going to be quite happy with some of the stuff that I would love to cover at some point. So yeah, that's Street Fighter, and that's the show we have for you guys for a week. Any parting thoughts about Street Fighter? Because I know you're very passionate about this franchise.
I mean, it's just a good series. There's a game out there for everyone. We haven't even. I mean, it'll be its own section. The Street Fighter Versus series is a whole different thing.
Oh yeah.
With Street Fighter, X-Men, all the different Marvel versus Capcom, and all those kind of things. Which that one's a little different, but the Street Fighter versus Marvel and all those other things. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. And just for some reason, anyone out there who hears this, watches this, if you have never jumped into Street Fighter because you think it's just wrong, you haven't found the Street Fighter for you. Because if you end up liking, even if you like some reason in Street Fighter, whatever, the 3EX games, if that's the one for you, that's the one for you. I'm not gonna, not at it, but just find the one that fits you.
Yeah, and there is a awesome collection that they released maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, or something like that.
The 30th anniversary.
Yeah, and that collection is phenomenal. It often goes on sale, so you're definitely not paying more than $25-$30 for it. Well worth it. I highly recommend you check it out. You can play it on Switch, PS4, wherever you want to play it. Highly recommend you go check that out and do your homework and check out where this franchise has been. I wish more fighting franchises would do collections like that personally, but they did an immense job, a really great job kind of collecting everything. And go check it out. And just reiterate what he said. There is one for everybody. So if you like faster stuff, there's there. If you like that tanky, heavier control, they were there for a while too. Anime style, whatever you want, they got something for you. So I highly recommend you go check those out. And so that's where we're going to leave the show for this week. We'll see you guys at some point when we see you guys. We're going to go on a little bit of a break. We're going to try to figure out some stuff and see what things look like. Plug your Twitch real quick towards the end so they know where to see you in these next few weeks until we're back.
Oh, yeah, the next few weeks because we have a lot of things going on. Jabral's having a huge move.
Major move.
So major move. So things are going to be slightly different. But I will be streaming over on Twitch, Seriously Steven, twitch.tv/Seriously Steven. And he joins constantly. He's in the chats constantly too. So
yeah, I'll pop in. Yeah.
We'll be there. And we'll figure out to have some other content come out here on the main channel.
Definitely. So go check them out and follow if you have not so far. And we'll see you guys when we see you guys. So this is Jabril and I'm with
Steve. Take care, guys.
And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.